On January 28, 2025, President Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent proposed a universal tariff on U.S. imports. It would start at 2.5% and increase by the same amount each month, potentially reaching 20%. The goal is to give businesses and countries time to adjust and negotiate better trade deals. However, President Trump prefers higher tariffs. He announced plans to impose tariffs on computer chips, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals, criticizing the current subsidies in these industries. He believes that higher tariffs will reduce imports and boost domestic production. These new tariffs are expected to be much higher than the initial 2.5%. Since taking office on January 20, 2025, President Trump has moved quickly to introduce tariffs on major U.S. trading partners, especially Canada, Mexico, and China. His administration says these tariffs are part of a broader strategy to address illegal immigration, drug trafficking, and trade imbalances. On Inauguration Day, Trump imposed a 25% tariff on all imports from Canada and Mexico. His administration argues that these tariffs are necessary to fight illegal immigration and stop the flow of drugs, especially fentanyl, into the U.S. These tariffs are set to begin on February 1, 2025. Canada strongly opposes these tariffs. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau warned that they could harm the Canadian economy and negatively impact American consumers and businesses. He emphasized the need for a strong economic partnership between both countries and hinted that Canada might retaliate if necessary. In response, Canada is not just considering counter-tariffs, it is also working with other nations, including the European Union, Denmark, and Mexico, to form a united front. Canadian Foreign Minister Mélanie Joly has reached out to officials in Britain, Mexico, and the EU to coordinate a response. She stressed the importance of being practical and strategic in handling this issue. Former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, who is seen as a potential successor to Trudeau, has suggested holding an international summit with leaders from Mexico, Denmark, Panama, and the EU. The goal would be to develop a joint response to U.S. tariffs and its assertions on sovereignty. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum also criticized the tariffs, saying they won't fix immigration or drug-related issues. She stressed the importance of cooperation between the U.S. and Mexico to address these complex challenges. She also warned that these tariffs could damage diplomatic relations between the two nations. Beyond targeting North American countries, Trump has also proposed a 10% tariff on all imports from China. He accuses China of being involved in the production and distribution of fentanyl, a highly potent synthetic opioid fueling the U.S. drug crisis. This new China tariff is also set to begin on February 1, 2025. In response, China's government has defended its trade relationship with the U.S., emphasizing the mutual benefits of trade. They have expressed a desire for constructive talks to resolve these trade disagreements. Expanding his trade policy, Trump has warned the European Union, EU, that it may face new tariffs if it does not increase its purchases of American oil and gas. He insists that the EU must lower its trade deficit with the U.S. by buying more American energy, or it will face tariffs on European imports. Trump's stance on trade and global influence goes beyond tariffs. He has revived his interest in purchasing Greenland and has not ruled out military action to achieve this. In response, Denmark has taken steps to reinforce its control over Greenland and strengthen alliances in Europe. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has been actively engaging with European leaders to build resistance against U.S. pressure. She emphasized the need for European unity in protecting sovereignty. Frederiksen has met with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron to discuss enhancing European security. Chancellor Scholz made it clear that borders should not be changed by force, a direct response to Trump's interest in Greenland. To strengthen its defense in the Arctic, Denmark has announced a major military investment of $2.1 billion. Denmark is making significant investments to strengthen its military presence in Greenland as tensions with the United States escalate. The government has allocated $2.1 billion to build 3 new Arctic naval vessels, acquire surveillance drones, and enhance satellite monitoring systems. These measures aim to reinforce Denmark's control over Greenland and ensure the security of the region. At the same time, Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen is actively engaging with European allies, seeking a unified response against President Trump's renewed interest in Greenland. Discussions at an upcoming security summit in Brussels will include the possibility of stationing European troops in Greenland, although Denmark has not formally requested this yet. Greenland's Prime Minister Mute Borup Egede has made it clear that while the island is open to cooperation with the United States, its people do not want to become Americans. He emphasized that Greenland belongs to its own people and expressed the island's long-term aspiration for self-determination and independence. His statement underlines Greenland's desire to maintain its sovereignty despite growing geopolitical pressures. Meanwhile, the European Union is facing increasing tensions with the United States, particularly in the energy sector. Over the past year, Europe has experienced multiple energy crises, including Ukraine blocking Russian energy exports, Qatar halting gas shipments to Europe, and Iran cutting off supplies due to unexplained technical issues. These disruptions have created significant instability in Europe's energy market. The situation worsened when the U.S. imposed additional sanctions on Russian oil and gas, causing global energy prices to surge. As a result, Europe has been hit with skyrocketing gas prices, growing public dissatisfaction with the European Commission, and rising inflation, further straining economies across the continent. In the midst of these economic challenges, President Trump has announced plans to impose further tariffs on European products, adding more pressure to the already fragile EU-US relationship. These new tariffs are expected to have long-term consequences on the European economy, exacerbating existing financial struggles and potentially pushing Europe into deeper economic uncertainty. Recognizing the need to protect its economy from U.S. trade policies, the EU has taken decisive steps to strengthen its global trade partnerships. One of its key strategies has been to diversify trade relationships, reducing its reliance on the United States while securing new economic allies. A major development in this strategy is the newly signed free trade agreement between the EU and Mexico. The deal, finalized on January 17, 2025, is aimed at reducing both sides' economic dependence on the U.S., particularly in anticipation of Trump's potential tariff increases. The agreement eliminates high tariffs on various EU exports to Mexico, including agricultural products such as cheese, poultry, pork, pasta, apples, jam, chocolate, and wine. This is expected to significantly boost the EU's agricultural and food exports. Additionally, European businesses will gain improved access to the Mexican market, including government contracts, financial services, and the telecommunications sector. This ensures that EU firms receive equal treatment compared to Mexico's other key trade partners, such as the United States and South Korea. Beyond market access, the trade agreement includes enforceable commitments on labor rights and environmental protections, reflecting the EU and Mexico's shared dedication to sustainable economic growth. Another critical aspect of the deal is its focus on strengthening the supply chain of essential raw materials, ensuring stable and secure access for industries that rely on these resources. This modernized agreement updates the original EU-Mexico Global Agreement, which had been in place since 2000 and aligns with the evolving global trade landscape. Before the agreement can be fully implemented, it must be ratified by both the EU and Mexican legislative bodies. However, concerns have been raised by European farmers who fear increased competition from Mexican imports, which could complicate the ratification process. Despite these challenges, the agreement marks a significant step in the EU's broader strategy to expand its global trade network, reduce economic vulnerability to U.S. policies, and reinforce its position as a major player in international trade. Through these initiatives, the EU is positioning itself to withstand the economic pressures that could come with a second Trump presidency. By forging new alliances and reducing dependence on American trade, the EU is signaling its commitment to economic resilience while countering the challenges posed by shifting U.S. policies. The future of the EU-US relationship remains uncertain, but Europe's proactive steps highlight its determination to navigate the changing geopolitical landscape on its own terms. The European Union and the Mercosur bloc, which includes Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, have successfully finalized a long-awaited trade agreement after 25 years of negotiations. This deal aims to establish one of the world's largest free trade zones, covering more than 700 million people and nearly 25% of global GDP. If fully implemented, it will significantly enhance economic ties between Europe and South America, creating new opportunities for trade and investment. A key component of the agreement is the elimination of tariffs on more than 90% of goods exchanged between the EU and Mercosur nations. This move is expected to save EU businesses approximately €4 billion annually in export duties. European industries, particularly those in automobiles and chemicals, will benefit from better market access in South America. In return, Mercosur nations will see increased exports of agricultural products such as beef and poultry to European markets, although these will be subject to specific quotas to protect European farmers. Another crucial aspect of the deal is its sustainability commitments. Both sides have agreed to uphold the Paris Climate Agreement and implement measures to curb deforestation by 2030. The agreement also includes dispute resolution mechanisms to ensure that environmental commitments are properly enforced. However, despite these assurances, the deal has sparked controversy within the EU, particularly among farmers and environmental groups. Critics argue that a surge in South American agricultural imports could undermine European farmers while raising concerns about environmental standards. French President Emmanuel Macron has been particularly vocal about these issues, calling for additional safeguards before approving the agreement. For the deal to take full effect, it must be ratified by all 27 EU member states and approved by the European Parliament. Given the strong opposition from agricultural sectors in several European countries, the ratification process could face major obstacles and may take several years to complete. The EU-Mercosur agreement is just one example of how global trade alliances have evolved over time. To understand how modern trade and security partnerships between the US and Europe developed, it is essential to look back at history. The foundations of US-European relations were laid in the aftermath of World War II, when the United States played a pivotal role in helping Europe rebuild. One of the most significant initiatives was the Marshall Plan of 1948, which provided extensive financial aid to war-torn European nations, helping to stabilize their economies and promote regional cooperation. The United States also supported the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community in 1951, a crucial step in preventing future conflicts between France and Germany by integrating key industries. As economic ties grew, diplomatic engagement deepened. In 1954, the European Union's predecessor established its first delegation in Washington, D.C. to manage the expanding transatlantic relationship. By 1961, the U.S. had set up a mission in Brussels to strengthen its diplomatic and economic cooperation with the European Economic Community, the EU's forerunner. Security alliances between the U.S. and Europe also took shape during this period. After World War II, the United States emerged as a global leader, actively shaping the international order in response to the rising influence of the Soviet Union. Recognizing the growing threat of Soviet expansion, the U.S. took decisive action to contain communism and promote democratic values worldwide. One of the most significant developments was the creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, in 1949. The U.S., Canada, and several Western European nations formed NATO as a collective defense pact, pledging mutual protection in case of an attack. The U.S. played a crucial role in NATO's foundation, not only by providing financial and military support, but also by stationing troops in Europe. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was appointed NATO's first Supreme Commander, symbolizing the U.S.'s leadership in the alliance. Another key moment in Cold War-era diplomacy was the introduction of the Truman Doctrine in 1947. President Harry S. Truman declared that the U.S. would support free nations resisting external pressure or armed subjugation, specifically targeting communist expansion. This policy first provided economic and military aid to Greece and Turkey, preventing them from falling under Soviet influence. The Truman Doctrine became the foundation of the U.S. containment strategy, which guided American foreign policy throughout the Cold War. Complementing this was the Marshall Plan, which launched in 1948 as a massive economic recovery program aimed at rebuilding war-ravaged Europe. By revitalizing European economies, the plan created stable conditions for democratic institutions to thrive, reducing the appeal of communist ideologies. These efforts not only rebuilt Europe but also cemented the U.S.-European alliance, laying the groundwork for today's economic and security ties. As the geopolitical landscape shifts in the 21st century, these historical foundations continue to shape transatlantic relations. The EU's trade expansion, particularly with Mexico and Mercosur, highlights its determination to build economic resilience amid rising tensions with the U.S. under Trump's administration. Meanwhile, NATO remains a key pillar of European security, adapting to new challenges in an era of evolving global threats. The future of U.S.-EU relations will depend on how these alliances navigate the complexities of international trade, security, and diplomacy in the years ahead. The success of the Marshall Plan further solidified Europe's alignment with American policies during the early Cold War. As the geopolitical landscape shifted, several global conflicts and crises played a crucial role in shaping the military and economic cooperation between the United States and Europe. One of the first major events that reinforced U.S.-European military cooperation was the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. The war heightened fears of communist expansion, leading NATO to establish the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, in 1951. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was appointed as the first Supreme Allied Commander, marking NATO's transition from a primarily political alliance to a structured military organization capable of collective defense. However, tensions within the alliance soon emerged during the Suez Crisis of 1956. When Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, Britain, France, and Israel launched a military intervention to regain control. The United States, under President Eisenhower, strongly opposed the move, fearing that military action would destabilize the Middle East and push Arab nations towards Soviet influence. The U.S. exerted diplomatic and economic pressure on its European allies, forcing them to withdraw from Egypt. This event exposed diverging strategic interests between the U.S. and Europe and signaled Europe's growing efforts to pursue a more independent foreign policy. Tensions between the Western Bloc and the Soviet Union escalated again during the Berlin Crisis of 1961, which became a pivotal moment in the Cold War. In June 1961, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev met with U.S. President John F. Kennedy and demanded that Allied forces withdraw from West Berlin, threatening to sign a separate peace treaty with East Germany. Such a treaty would have effectively ended the existing four-power agreements that guaranteed U.S., British, and French access to West Berlin. In response, Kennedy reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to defending West Berlin and ordered a significant military buildup, including doubling draft calls and increasing U.S. Army troop strength. The crisis reinforced NATO's importance as a stabilizing force in Europe. The alliance's collective defense principle helped coordinate a unified military and political response to Soviet pressure, ensuring Western control over West Berlin and preventing its isolation. Throughout this period, the United States remained a strong supporter of European integration, viewing a united and economically strong Europe as a barrier against communist expansion. This support was evident in U.S. backing of initiatives like the European Economic Community, EEC, which aimed to strengthen economic and political ties among Western European nations. However, while the U.S. and Europe were largely aligned during the Cold War, deep disagreements surfaced over the Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975. The war became a major point of contention between the U.S. and its European allies, with many European nations refusing to support American intervention in Southeast Asia. France was among the most vocal critics, strongly opposing U.S. military involvement due to its own colonial history in Indochina and a desire to maintain independent foreign policy decisions. While the United Kingdom and West Germany showed varying levels of support, they refrained from committing troops, highlighting Europe's reluctance to become directly involved in America's conflicts outside of the Western sphere. Economic disagreements between the U.S. and Europe also emerged, particularly regarding monetary policies. The collapse of the Bretton Woods system in the early 1970s led to major fluctuations in global exchange rates, negatively impacting European economies. To counter this instability and reduce reliance on the U.S. dollar, European leaders sought monetary cooperation within the continent. This led to the establishment of the European Monetary System, EMS, in March 1979, under the leadership of European Commission President Roy Jenkins. The EMS introduced a structured exchange rate system to stabilize European currencies, ensuring more predictable trade conditions among European Economic Community, EEC nations. The EMS also introduced the European Currency Unit, ECU, a basket of European currencies, and the Exchange Rate Mechanism, ERM, which required countries to maintain their currencies within agreed-upon margins. These efforts were instrumental in paving the way for the eventual creation of the euro. During the Reagan administration, 1981 to 1989, the U.S. and Europe focused on economic liberalization and free market policies, aligning with Europe's push for a single market under the Single European Act of 1986. However, despite this economic alignment, trade disputes intensified, particularly over agricultural subsidies under Europe's Common Agricultural Policy, CAP. The U.S. argued that CAPI subsidies distorted global trade by making European agricultural products cheaper, which harmed U.S. farmers. These tensions occasionally strained U.S.-European relations, but both sides continued to maintain strong economic and political ties throughout the Cold War. As the Cold War ended, the U.S. and Europe entered a new phase of cooperation, focusing on post-Cold War alignment and the integration of former Eastern Bloc nations into Western economic and security structures. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the subsequent expansion of NATO and the European Union marked a significant shift in global politics. The U.S. and its European allies worked closely to stabilize newly independent nations, promote democracy, and integrate former communist states into the Western economic system. This deep-rooted historical cooperation continues to shape modern U.S.-European relations, influencing key areas such as trade, security, and diplomacy in an increasingly multipolar world. The lessons learned from these past alliances and disputes remain crucial as both regions navigate new geopolitical challenges in the 21st century. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked a turning point in global politics, leading both the European Union, EU, and the United States, US, to redefine their relationship. With the Cold War over, the focus shifted from military confrontation to economic cooperation and peacekeeping efforts. This transition was formalized through key agreements that strengthened transatlantic ties and broadened the scope of collaboration between the two powers. In November 1990, the Transatlantic Declaration was introduced, establishing a structured framework for political dialogue between the European Community, the EU's predecessor, and the United States. This agreement emphasized shared democratic values, human rights, and the rule of law, ensuring that both sides remained aligned in key global matters. It also laid the groundwork for regular consultations on political and economic issues, reinforcing their long-term partnership. Building on this, the new Transatlantic Agenda (NTA) was launched in December 1995 at the EU-US Summit in Madrid. This agreement expanded cooperation between the two regions and outlined four main objectives: promoting peace and democracy worldwide, tackling global challenges such as climate change, terrorism, and public health issues, expanding world trade and economic relations, and fostering cultural and educational exchanges to strengthen ties between their people. The NTA was a major step forward, moving beyond simple discussions and focusing on joint actions in critical areas. Despite these efforts to strengthen economic relations, recent years have seen growing trade conflicts between the United States and its key trading partners, including the EU, Canada, Mexico, China, and others. The U.S.'s tariff policies have raised tensions, prompting these countries to consider coordinated countermeasures which could have serious consequences for the U.S. economy. Given that the U.S. heavily relies on imported goods, any retaliatory tariffs or trade restrictions from these nations could disrupt supply chains, raise inflation, and increase financial strain on American consumers. If such a collective response were put into action, it could specifically target key sectors of the U.S. economy, such as technology, automobiles, pharmaceuticals, and agriculture. These industries are deeply connected to global supply chains, and higher tariffs on imports would increase production costs, make U.S. businesses less competitive, and create additional challenges for American consumers already dealing with rising prices. Countries like China, Canada, and the EU hold significant economic power and have the ability to redirect trade flows toward alternative markets, reducing their dependence on the U.S. economy. For the EU, this trade dispute could push member states to diversify their supply sources and work towards greater economic independence, decreasing reliance on U.S. goods, technology, and defense industries. Similarly, Canada and Mexico, both crucial trading partners and members of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, could unite against U.S. tariffs, leveraging their key roles in North American supply chains to negotiate fairer trade terms. China, as one of the world's largest exporters, could also take steps to isolate the U.S. economically by forming new trade partnerships and strengthening agreements like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCP. Such moves would reduce U.S. influence in global trade and shift the balance of economic power toward other regions. Although the U.S. has a strong domestic economy, it is still highly dependent on global imports for essential goods like semiconductors, raw materials, and consumer products. This makes it vulnerable to supply shortages, which could slow economic growth, increase unemployment, and weaken industries that rely on international trade. If the trade dispute continues, businesses that depend on imported goods will struggle, potentially leading to higher costs for American consumers and a slowdown in the overall economy. Beyond the economic impact, this conflict could also have geopolitical consequences. Countries affected by U.S. tariff policies may choose to strengthen their relationships with each other, bypassing the U.S. in trade agreements and forming stronger economic alliances. For example, Europe, Canada, Mexico, and Asia-Pacific nations could work together to deepen economic ties, reducing their dependence on the U.S. market and increasing their influence in global trade. As a result, the U.S. could find itself increasingly isolated, with fewer trade partners and reduced economic leverage on the world stage. If the U.S. continues its protectionist policies, it risks alienating its closest allies while encouraging greater cooperation among its competitors. In the long run, this could lead to a weaker U.S. market presence, a more divided global trade system, and serious challenges in maintaining economic stability within the country. The outcome of these trade disputes will have lasting consequences, shaping the future of global trade and economic leadership. If you found this breakdown insightful, consider liking and subscribing for more updates on global trade, economic trends, and international policies. Your support helps keep these discussions going and brings more valuable content your way.